everybody. It's a beautiful, warm day outside. Yeah, there you go. It is a beautiful day outside. The warm is not very accurate, huh? I know. So we're in the end of Acts chapter 9 and jumping into chapter 10 today as we continue our study through Acts. To kind of give you guys an update on the Tuesday class we've been having with the young professional group. We had 31 in class Tuesday night. There were 45 people here, 11 kiddos, 3 helpers, adult helpers that were next door with those kids. So that would be 14 over in the basement here, and then we had 31 in class. So we had 45 people Tuesday night. So it's exciting, and I know there were still probably close to 8 to 10 that were planned to come normally but couldn't this week. So really good things are going on there. We're excited about it, seeing a lot of positivity from that. The fellowship's wonderful. We're eating together. It's a good time. So, and then we're not just eating physical food, but then we're taking some time to feast on God's Word and discuss His Word further. So continue to pray for that class and that things will continue to go well with the class. I think I've got helpers signed up almost till the middle of April, so that's pretty awesome. Thank you all that have signed up so far. The class is only going to last till the end of May. Maybe go an extra week because I'll be holding a gospel meeting the middle of April at Keltonburg in the Smithville area, and so I won't be here that Tuesday night. So we might go one extra week into June just to kind of wrap it up if we need to. But thank you for all y'all do to help everything go smoothly here at Central. We're blessed to have you here. In chapter 9, we've been reading a lot about Paul's conversion. And chapters 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you pretty much are reading all through these chapters about who? Who's kind of, you're reading about a lot of people, but who's one of the main ones that kind of sticks out in your mind? Especially chapter 2. Peter, right? But then you have chapter 7, and who really sticks out in chapter 7? Stephen, right? And then after Stephen, you get to chapter 8. In chapters 8 and 9, you still have some about Peter in chapter 8, but chapter 9 is when you read the conversion of Saul, of Paul. And of course, chapter 8, you have the Ethiopian eunuch, the last half of the chapter. But so with Paul's conversion in chapter 9, there's kind of a little bit of a break here, because chapter 10, where do we go back to? It's Cornelius, but who's going to him? Peter, right? Peter goes to Cornelius. So we're kind of back on his ministry for a moment. But then we're going to get back on Paul's at some point here in Acts and move further through it. So chapter 9, though, we have his conversion. And after his conversion, what does he immediately begin to do, Paul? He's preaching, right? And then after that, he's kind of, people are skeptical, of course, and naturally so. In verse 23, it talks about how he escapes death. The Jews were plotting to kill him, but their plot became known to Saul. And so as they watched at the gates to kill him day and night, the disciples took him by night and let him down through the wall in a large basket. When he comes to Jerusalem, he tries to join the disciples, but they're afraid because what we said, they don't believe he's really a disciple. They think he's just trying to trick them. He's trying to get in with them so that he can further hurt the church. But there's a man that kind of steps up and says, no, that's not the way that we are. That's not how we are. That's not who we are. We need to accept this man. And who is that person? Who's that man that steps up? Barnabas, right? So Barnabas steps up and says, no. He actually takes him, brings him to the apostles, and he says, we can't do this. He declares to them how he had seen the Lord on the road, and this, of course, is Saul recounting what happened to him. And so when he was with them at Jerusalem, coming in and going out, he spoke boldly in the name of the Lord Jesus, disputed against the Hellenists, but they attempt to kill him. When the brethren found out, they brought him down to Caesarea and sent him to Tarsus. And this is kind of where we ended last week, verses 31 and verse 31. The church is still prospering through all this, despite the persecution we've seen all through the beginning of Acts, from chapter 2 on. Well, I guess really chapter 3 on, but chapter 2 is really when they're converted, right? And you have all these people that are being baptized for remission of their sins. Chapter 3 on, you see persecution taking place to the point that there's a time when they're scattered everywhere, but the gospel's still preached. To a point now where Saul is a new convert, yet despite people trying to kill him multiple times, he's still preaching. And so that's pretty amazing that as a new convert, he's still passionate about this. But then in verse 32, we're going to be introduced to someone else. And so it says, it came to pass as Peter went through all parts of the country, that he also came down to the saints who dwelt in Lydda. There he found a certain man named Aeneas, who had been bedridden 8 years and was paralyzed. So how long had this man been bedridden? 8 years. And he's paralyzed. And Peter said to him, Aeneas, Jesus the Christ heals you. Arise and make your bed. Then he arose immediately. So all who dwelt at Lydda and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. Now this might be a passage that parents go to for their kids and say, look, the Scripture says to make your bed. Right? Because it says that he arose and he made his bed. But Peter comes in and he heals this man. So again, you have this miraculous healing. And how many turn to the Lord as a result of this? All who dwelt at Lydda and Sharon. They saw him and they turned to the Lord. They knew this man, that for 8 years he'd been bedridden. This is a true miracle. It's not, it wasn't that this man played it for 8 years. And he's like, all right, this is the time. This is the year. This is the day we're going to get up from the bed and we'll convince everyone. No, this was real life. Miracles weren't just something that was done that didn't affect the people around them, because people knew this man, just like the people knew the man at the gate, right, that was healed. They knew these people. They interacted with them on a daily basis. So to see someone they've known be ill, or in this case, be bedridden and paralyzed for this length of time, 8 years, that really moved them to convert to Christianity. They believed that Peter was a messenger of God, that he was bringing God's message, that God had given him power to do these things. Now, we get to verse 36, and we're going to go to Joppa. So you have Paul's conversion, but we're still back on Peter now at the end of chapter 9. At Joppa, there was a certain disciple named Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and charitable deeds, which she did. Okay, so what was she known for? Good works and charitable deeds. We're about to read about a man that is known for these similar things. So she's known for this, but it happened in those days that she became sick and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in an upper room. And since Lydda was near Joppa, and the disciples had heard that Peter was there, they sent 2 men to him, imploring him not to delay in coming to them. Then Peter arose and went with them. When he had come, they brought him to the upper room, and all the widows stood by him weeping, showing the tunics and garments which Dorcas had made while she was with them. But Peter put them all out and knelt down and prayed. And turning to the body, he said, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. Then she gave her his hand and lifted her up. Or then he gave her his hand, and lifted her up. And when he had called the saints and widows, he presented her alive. And it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed on the Lord. So it was that he stayed many days in Joppa with Simon, a tanner. So the disciples went to Joppa to get whom? To bring back, to heal Dorcas, or to bring Dorcas back. Tabitha back. Peter. And then Peter kneels down, and what does he say to the body? Tabitha, arise. And she does. And he brings her out and shows the power of the Lord. But first he sends everybody out. And then he gets down, right? And he heals her. And as a result of the resurrection of Dorcas, of Tabitha, what was the response of the people? Once Peter brings out Tabitha / Dorcas, right? Once he brings her out, how do the people respond? Do what? They believed, right? Many turned. Again, they knew she was dead. When he goes in and he sees her laying there and he heals her from the death, he brings her back from death. He brings her back out. They know that she was really dead. Now they see that she's really alive. This isn't a trick. Many turn to the Lord. Through these, we see again the purpose of miracles. What was the purpose? Right. To confirm the word that was being taught and to confirm the messenger that was delivering that message. That I am not just preaching to you my own will, my own desire, my own words, my own law. I am actually trying to teach you what God says, share with you what God says. I am His messenger, right? And they didn't have the complete Word of God like we do. So, miracles help to drive that point home. That's why Jesus did them. That's why the apostles did them. Was to show people they were really who they claimed to be. In Jesus' case, He really was the Son of God. In the apostles' case, they really were followers of Jesus. They really were doing what God had called them to do, because nobody could do what they were doing unless God was with them. That's what they said of Jesus, right? No man could do what you're doing unless God be with him. And the same was true with the apostles. They couldn't do what they did without God. So you continue to see that there's preaching going on verbally, but also in the miracles, because that's a teaching moment to, again, confirm the message that's being taught verbally. So the words, the actions are all connecting together and lining up and proving the point and driving it home. And as a result of the things lining up and truth being done in word and in action, you see people turning to God. Moved by what they're seeing, that there's no other way to describe this except God's will is being done. God is with these people, and then people turn to God. Then you get to chapter 10, and we are going to read about a man named Cornelius. Well, I just gave you the answer to the first blank, but his name is Cornelius. And he's described in a certain way. Verse 2 said, well, in verse 1 we learn he is a centurion of what was called the Italian regiment. He was a devout man and one who feared God with all his household, who gave alms generously to the people and prayed to God always. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming in and saying to him, Cornelius. And when he observed him, he was afraid and said, What is it, Lord? So he said to him, Your prayers and your alms have come up for a memorial before God. Now, send men to Joppa and send for Simon, whose surname is Peter. He is lodging with Simon a tanner, whose house is by the sea. He will tell you what you must do. And when the angel who spoke to him had departed, Cornelius called 2 of his household servants and a devout soldier from among those who waited on him continually. So when he had explained all these things to them, he sent them to Joppa. Isn't it interesting that time and again, people are being told to go and wait for some person to come and tell them what to do, instead of just being told right then what they should do? Isn't it interesting that God is using people to carry out His message and share His message? And the same is true today. There are people in our country, and I don't mean, well, I do mean in the USA, but I really mean in our country, in the way, in our land, in our state, in our city, in our community. There are people that are waiting, and they don't realize it, for someone to come and tell them what to do. And the first word in the Great Commission is what? Go. You can't do any of the other things if you don't go. Oftentimes, it seems And I'm not trying to be a judge of any other congregation because that's not my place, and I don't know what all is going on behind the scenes and in their building and everything else. But doesn't it seem that at times, too often, we wait for the people to come to us? We're like, well, hey, we got our doors open. You know, we've got a nice building for when they come. But are we really going with a purpose? And people today are like, oh, you know, door knocking doesn't work anymore. Look, I know that today it's probably a whole lot different than it used to be. But that doesn't mean door knocking doesn't work. It doesn't mean that if that doesn't work, that there's no other means by which we can accomplish the same things. I wonder if we're finding excuses to not go and thinking that that's fine. And it's not. Because the command is still to go. Wherever we go and we carry that message that the Christians were carrying. Because when they were scattered, what did they do when they were scattered? Continued to preach wherever they found themselves. And our identity doesn't change whether we live in America or live somewhere else, because our identity is not found in a worldly term. Our identity is in Jesus as a Christian. So wherever we go, that identity remains Christian. No matter if it's in a different country or a different state, a different town. And so wherever we go, our obligation and our responsibility as Christian doesn't change. So I read about this man who was told, hey, someone's going to come and tell you what to do. I read about Saul, on the road to Damascus, who was told, hey, go wait here. Someone's going to come and tell you what to do. I read about an interaction with a man named Philip before he goes to the eunuch, where he's told, hey, this man's waiting, he's studying, he's looking. You are going to be the one to go and tell this man what to do. Teach him. Our command is go. And the old saying, perhaps you've heard it, is, I'm going to see if you can finish it. Go ye means go me. And we need to have the mindset of Isaiah in Isaiah 6 and verse 8. When before the throne of God in this beautiful scene of worship and the descriptions that are there of God's throne and Isaiah's response and realizing how little he is and insignificant he is and how sinful he is and unworthy to be in this situation, where he begs the Lord to forgive him. He's a man of unclean lips. Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips. And the Lord asks a question. He doesn't say to Isaiah, you're going to go. What does the Lord say or ask? Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And Isaiah is the one. Pick me, pick me. Here I am, send me. What a beautiful statement, a powerful statement, and a reflection of the mindset that a Christian should have. I'll go. Send me. Let me do it. But a lot of us, at times, we seem to be more reserved in saying, let someone else do it. We're more like Moses than Philip running to the chariot. We're more like Moses rather than Isaiah saying, here am I. We're saying, but God, I'm not good enough. I'm not a good speaker. What do I even tell them? What if they don't believe me? He goes on and on as to why he shouldn't be sent. And finally, his last excuse is, just please send somebody else. Send somebody else. And I feel like maybe that's what we do, is we go down the list of why we shouldn't be used. And God could use someone else, but we don't view it how beautiful it is that he says, no. You're going. I want you to go. And it's okay to kind of scratch your head and be like, But at the end of the day, we've got to respond like Ananias. Because Ananias was nervous about Saul, right? This guy? But ultimately, what did he do? Went. So you might have initial reservations. That doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't mean your faith is weak. But at the end of the day, your call is still the same, despite that, to go. And so that was just kind of something that stuck out to me initially reading the first 8 verses, is how often God says, hey, wait here. Someone is coming to tell you what you need to do. Now, you might read the beginning here and be like, but why? look at all the good this guy did. Why does someone need to go to him? Shouldn't they go somewhere else, to someone who's not a good person, who's not doing these good things? I mean, what all does it say? There's several things listed that it says he did. Number one, he was a devout man, and he feared God with all of his household. He gave alms generously to the people. Not just gave alms to the people, but it says he gave alms generously to the people. And prayed to God, not sometimes, not most of the time, not here or there, always. That's the man we're talking about. And that's the one that God says, someone's going to come and tell you what you need to do. Notice, though, when he tells him what to do, it doesn't seem that Cornelius was wondering, but why? Don't you see all that I do? What else could I possibly need to do? So I find it pretty interesting. Cornelius lived in Caesarea, which was the headquarters of the Roman government in Palestine. And as a centurion, he exercised authority over 100 soldiers of a regiment. Now, a regiment was usually around 600 soldiers. So he had 100 of those that were under his command. His description proves that someone can be a really good religious person, but still out of fellowship with God. And that is something we need to keep in mind. Go to Romans 10. Romans chapter 10. Notice verse 1. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they may be saved. For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. For they, being ignorant of God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted to the righteousness of God. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. They have a zeal for God, but they don't have that zeal according to a knowledge. Saul had a zeal for God, didn't he? But his zeal wasn't according to knowledge, not to the knowledge he truly needed. It was to earthly knowledge, not the true knowledge of the identity of Jesus and that he was the Son of God. And, of course, is, as we speak of him in the present tense. So, being a good religious person doesn't mean we're technically in fellowship with God. In chapters 10 and 11 of Acts, you really see a lot of discussion on fellowship. And there's kind of two aspects to that fellowship. There's a horizontal aspect of fellowship with God, and there's a vertical aspect of fellowship with God, a horizontal fellowship with man. And so you look at this. First, you have fellowship in relation to Cornelius' vision. Cornelius, you're doing a lot of great things, but right now you're not technically, in the eyes of God, in fellowship with God. There's something you must do. Picking up in verse 9. The next day, as they went on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray, about the 6th hour. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven opened and an object like a great sheet bound at the four corners, descending to him and let down to the earth. In it were all kinds of four-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And a voice came to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." And a voice spoke to him again the second time, "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." This was done 3 times, and the object was taken up into heaven again. Now while Peter wondered within himself what this vision which he had seen meant, Behold, the men who had been sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate. And they called and asked where Simon, whose surname was Peter, was lodging there, whether he was or not. While Peter thought about the vision, the Spirit said to him, Behold, 3 men are seeking you. Arise, therefore, go down and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. Then Peter went down to the men who had been sent to him from Cornelius and said, Yes, I am whom you seek. For what reason have you come? And they said, Cornelius the centurion, a just man, one who fears God and has a good reputation among all the nation of the Jews, was divinely instructed by a holy angel to summon you to his house and to hear words from you. Then he invited them in and lodged them. On the next day, Peter went away with them, and some brethren from Joppa accompanied him. So, Peter had gone to the housetop for what reason? To pray, right? And while he's praying, he falls into a trance. And what did he see coming out of heaven that was let down by 4 corners? This great sheet, what was on it? All these animals, right? And what did the voice say? Arise, Peter, kill and eat. And Peter said what? No, I've never eaten anything common or unclean. And then there's a very important statement. Of course, all this is important. But verse 15, when the voice spoke a second time, what God has cleansed, you must not call common. And this was done not just one time, but it was done 3 times. Now, we know that Peter wasn't willing initially to do what he was told to do, but then it was made known to him what this was all about. So these 3 men come, they get him, and of course the voice says, I've sent them, go with them. Don't doubt anything. They're from me. So they come, Peter takes them in, and they're getting ready to travel. And this, in verse 24, is where he's going to meet Cornelius. So you see again, fellowship is mentioned in a sense, in concept, with Peter and this sheet of animals. Fellowship between Cornelius and God, fellowship when it comes to these animals and what Peter was thinking about the animals and realizing it's not about actual animals. And then there's this fellowship that we see in the lesson that Peter teaches Cornelius in verse 24 through 28. The following day, they entered Caesarea. Now Cornelius was waiting for them and had called together his relatives and close friends. As Peter was coming in, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, Stand up. I myself am also a man. You know, there's a lot to be said there when it comes to humility for all of us. And especially possibly for those in ministry positions, but we're just people. We're just men and women. We don't belong on a pedestal. We're not trying to lift ourselves up. We're trying to lift up Jesus and ask others to help us lift. We don't want to put ourselves up there. Some people will, out of respect and love and for us. And, that's an honor to be considered that way. But ultimately, Peter says, it's not me. I'm just a person like you. I'm a man like you are. Don't fall down and worship me. So, verse 27, as he talked with him, he went in and found many who had come together. Then he said to them, You know how unlawful it is for a Jewish man to keep company with or go to one of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Therefore I came without objection as soon as I was sent for. I asked then, For what reason have you sent for me? So, there is this preparation made for Peter. Cornelius had gathered together whom? Who came into his house? All his close friends, his relatives. And also remember, a household in the first century is not like our households typically today, right? My household is me and Lauren, Liam, and Ella. In the first century, though, my household potentially would be my mom and dad, me and Lauren, Liam, and Ella. And we would be living in their house. And then in that culture, they had servants, and those servants would also be considered part of the household. So when you see households mentioned, just remember, it's not just like a mama, a daddy, and a couple children, or a child, or what. It's more than that, a lot more. So when you say when you see the household is converted, is baptized, you basically have a small church. You really do, because some households you might see 15 to 20 people. And how many churches in Warren County, how many congregations of the Lord's Church in Warren County are around that number? So you see these kind of house churches, if you will, in that time that were happening. Because when Cornelius is baptized, when others are baptized and their household converts, that's a lot of people that are converting. It's not just a few people. So Cornelius has his family, his close friends, waiting for Peter's arrival. And when he meets Peter, what does he do? He falls down to worship. And of course Peter says, "Don't worship me, I'm just a man like you are." So verse 30, Cornelius said, 4 days ago I was fasting until this hour. Peter wants to know why he's here. And this is Cornelius' response. "At the 9th hour I prayed in my house, and behold, a man stood before me in bright clothing, and said, 'Cornelius, your prayer has been heard, and your alms are remembered in the sight of God. Send therefore to Joppa, and call Simon here, whose surname is Peter. He's lodging in the house of Simon a tanner by the sea. When he comes, he will speak to you.' So I sent to you immediately, and you have done well to come. Now therefore we are all present before God to hear all the things commanded you by God." So Peter says, "So why have you sent for me?" And Cornelius says, "You tell me. I was told to send for you. And we're waiting here to hear what you have to say from God." In verse 34 is important, and if you underline or highlight or do anything in your Bibles, make sure to do it at this verse. Peter opened his mouth and said, "In truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality." Now, if you're reading the King James Version, in truth, I perceive that God is no longer a respecter of persons. He shows no partiality. Church, if God shows no partiality, then there's no business for partiality being part of our lives. James 2 is all about that at verses 1 through 13. That when you look at people coming into your assembly and they're dressed nice, and you're like, "Ooh, here's great prospective members for our congregation," and you give them, as people would call it today, the red carpet treatment. And you see someone else walk in who might be in worn down clothes or overalls or blue jeans that might have holes in them in a t-shirt, and all you can think of is, don't they have anything better to wear? Chances are they don't. Don't look at this person over here or this family and say, "Ooh, they've got kids. We're hoping to have kids in our congregation. We need," and neglect this family over here because of the way they're dressed or because of any other reasons. There is no partiality in the life of a Christian when it comes to showing favoritism towards people. There's no place for it. Whether that's in regards to color of skin, whether that's in regards to clothing that you choose, whether that's in regards to your family dynamic, whatever. Peter says God's no longer a respecter of persons. And that was more in the sense, obviously, of God's will is not just for Jews. It is now for everyone. Everyone. Every race, even those outside of Judaism, right? Even those outside of Jews. So, that's what is meant in that statement. But for us, God does not show partiality in terms of salvation or in terms of His love for people. We can't either. And if partiality creeps into our lives, we need to be very careful. We need to take a step back, and we need to pray for forgiveness and work on it, because that's not a part of who we are. Jesus sat down and ate with sinners and tax collectors, the people that everybody else in His culture ignored and hated and despised. Jesus talked to a Samaritan woman at the well. And you know the relationship between Jews and Samaritans and how much the Jews despise the Samaritans. So much so that if you're traveling from point A to point B and Samaria's in the middle, a lot of times they went around and added significant time to their journey because they did not want to encounter Samaritans. But Jesus talked to the woman at the well. Jesus talked to the woman who had the flow of blood for 12 years that everyone hated, despised, wouldn't look at, wouldn't go around. They believed if they looked at her or if they sat in the chair she sat in, they would have what she had. They wouldn't go near her. And Jesus talked to her. after she touched his garment. Jesus constantly showed he was not a respecter of persons. That's no longer God's will that the Jews are saved. That was part of his initial plan, right? But his ultimate plan was to get to the point where everyone could be saved through the death of Jesus on the cross. Verse 34, in truth, I perceive God shows no partiality. But in every nation, whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted with him. Any comments you would like to offer? We've got a little bit of time here. Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard for us to not, or to do that sometimes. I shouldn't say hard, but we just sometimes fail to do that.
Well, I think it can be hard. I don't think that's an inaccurate word. It can be hard at times. And again, a lot of that has to do with kind of the time in which we live and the mindset of everybody else. You know, when the world's views and opinions are one way and they're in contradiction to God's commands and expectations for our lives, it isn't always easy just to simply do this. It's what we must do, but it's not always easy. And the Christian life isn't always easy. And like you said, Peter knew. He had this vision. Yet what happened in Galatians 2 is what you were exactly talking about. Paul talks about how he withstood Peter to the face. In other words, he confronted him. He called him out. Because Peter would hang out with the Jews, he would talk with them, they'd probably laugh together, have a meal together, and then it's almost like a movie. Then the other side of the tracks come, right? Here come the Jews, and Peter's like, ooh. And so he distances himself and acts completely different. No, I can't be your friend. No, I'm not supposed to be around you. I can't talk to you. I can't eat with you. I can't laugh with you because the Jews are coming. And Paul's like, you can't do that, Peter. And he calls him out and holds him accountable. That's holding accountable, which is what we are supposed to do partly as Christians. We don't always do it well, but you know, Paul and Peter probably knew each other pretty well to some degree, I would think. I think sometimes we want to, maybe people try to hold each other accountable, but they do it to people they've never spoken 3 words to before. And the first words you say to them are trying to tell them how wrong they are. You got to be careful with that too. Spend time investing in people, and then that gives you opportunity to call them out boldly with love, and they know that the boldness doesn't mean love is not present. But if they don't know you, and you haven't spoken to them in 10 years, except to now tell them how wrong they are, now, why would they respond any other way than to be offended and frustrated and upset and not want to speak to you again? We have to invest in each other. We invest in people that aren't Christians. We need to invest in each other in growing in our friendships. Look, I used to tell my teenagers this all the time. There are people that you naturally connect with instantly. And they become your best friends, and you eat together all the time. You might even vacation together. You're just close. And none of that is wrong. But there can be a danger if those same people that we're always doing stuff with are the only people we speak to when we come to worship. I'm not saying we don't speak to them at all, but I'm saying if they're the only ones we speak to here as well as outside these walls, that's not going to help the church. And so you don't have to invite every member of the congregation to your home. You don't have to be best friends with every single one and know all the details of their life and be able to tell from their birth till now their story, right? It's not that, but it's just spending some time getting to know each other. How many of you eat lunch? You don't eat ever? It doesn't surprise me. Okay. How many of you like to eat lunch with other people? Or dinner? How many of you eat food, right? Why not start inviting some people you don't know to grab a bite to eat? You don't have to bring them into your home. You can. That's a lot it's a lot better of an opportunity. But why not? If you go out to eat lunch on Sunday afternoons, why not start inviting people each Sunday, different people, just to get to know them a little bit better? Is there a better way to get to know someone than to spend time around a meal together? Not really. Because if they get sweet tea, or if they get unsweet tea, you know they're not going to be a friend, right? We're out of time. Thank you for being here. We'll wrap up chapter 10 next week, and then we'll get into chapter 11 as we continue with Peter's mission here. Yes? Oh, for 10, it is Journey to Joppa. Journey to Joppa. I'm going to try to get these to you for Sunday. I got to make sure we have the right card stock. But I'm going to try and go ahead and give you these bookmarks so you can keep them with you each week when we come together to know the ABCs of Acts. 10 is the letter J, and it would be Journey to Joppa. Journey to Joppa. Thank you all for being here. Make sure to grab a handout for the sermons. They're in both lobbies. It should say at the top, crosswords number 3, and then behold, a woman, behold thy son. So make sure to grab one of those, and make sure to meet someone that you don't know or have not met yet. We'll see you all again in just a moment.
The plans are dim, thus I wait for his returning, singing of the way to heaven. Such the joyful song of morning, such tranquil song of eve. Though I through the valley of shadow, or mountain or troubled sea, and oft in the darkness have traveled.